Good afternoon. Welcome to Prime Time at the BU Library. Prime Time is a collaboration between the Friends of the BU Library, Academic Affairs, and other offices on campus, and celebrates learning in and beyond the classroom of Bethel faculty, students, and staff. We archive videos of past presentations. If you'd like to explore them, you can find them on the BU Digital Library YouTube channel or in the Spark Digital Archive. Join us on Thursday, November 21st, for an open mic hour hosted by Associate Professor Angela Shannon Preston. All students, staff, and faculty are welcome to come and share their creative poetry, prose, and fiction. Today, we welcome Dr. AnneMarie Kooistra, the 2024 to 2025 Faculty Excellence for Teaching recipient. Faculty Excellence Awards are awarded every year in the areas of teaching, scholarship, and service. Faculty members nominate their colleagues, and the Professional Development Committee selects the winners. The awards are presented at the Fall Faculty Retreat. Today, Dr. Kooistra, Professor of History, will share her experience and insight into how the values of vulnerability, hospitality, and the liberal arts make the classroom a good place for learning. Join me in welcoming Dr. Kooistra.
Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. First, I want to thank my colleagues for nominating me for this award. I'm grateful to be part of a department that has such an excellent reputation for teaching. It's also been such a good experience to have spent nearly 20 years teaching as part of an interdisciplinary team of excellent teachers, whether that's been my short stint as part of the CWC team or my much longer tenure on the humanities team, which just a little shout out. I am wearing my humanities t-shirt here. Anna Thompson designed it. If you need to get one, you can go see Anna afterwards. I'm not involved in that part. So my colleagues have been incredibly generous, sharing not only their best teaching techniques, but also their ideas, and I'm grateful that I still have the opportunity to learn from them. I also happen to be a big fan of the library. I'm so thankful for the book recommendations, so thankful for those. The quality of materials that they managed to make available even during budget crunches, and the welcoming atmosphere they provide. There are so many other people here at Bethel that make my job easier. Whether it's the folks who clean and maintain the campus, that was actually in here already, Zach. I didn't know you were coming, but thank you for that. Folks like Susie Nelson, that was also in here, just so you know, who makes sure, this is the vital role Susie plays for us. She makes sure that humanities students have a bus to take to off-campus events, and she makes sure that those busing companies get paid. She handles all sorts of details that I don't have to deal with. So thank you, Susie. And then also the folks in admissions or the registrar's office who make sure I have students to teach and help get students in the right classes and graduated in a timely fashion. And then there's the students. I don't really even know where to begin in talking about them, so I'll just say it feels like an immense privilege the vast majority of the time to be able to teach as well as learn from them. I didn't know that I wanted to teach. I wasn't one of those little girls who grew up thinking I was going to be a teacher. I didn't have like stuffed animals that I taught. So every day that I do teach, it still feels a little bit like a surprise. My father was a police officer, and my first real career thought was that I would be a prosecuting attorney. But without going into the sort of odd detour that has brought me here, I mostly want to emphasize that teaching has never seemed like a natural fit for me. School, however, was. And after 2 years of a fairly traditional Christian undergraduate experience, I opted to take a semester at the Oregon Extension. This is my year, so if you are bored with what I'm saying, you could sort of see if you could guess where I am in that picture. Laura Hunt is at the Oregon Extension right now, and she's still searching the walls, trying to figure out where I am in all of the pictures. So I spent a semester at the Oregon Extension, read some books, chop some wood. That was the tagline on a poster, and I was sold. That semester was transformative for me in many ways. I had always loved a good lecture, and there were still some of these at the Oregon Extension. But up at the Oregon Extension, the emphasis really was on reading some books and having a good conversation. Every day, I would sit in a professor's house, sipping a warm beverage and chatting with a handful of other students about what we were reading and thinking. Conversation continued in our cabins into the afternoon while we were preparing our reading for the next day, making supper, and it felt like heaven to me. So, when I unexpectedly faced the prospect of teaching my own classes as a young 20-something, I reached out to my old Oregon Extension professor, Sam Alvord. What should I read so that I can teach? The first book that Sam recommended was Parker Palmer's Courage to Teach, and I realized that can be a controversial pick, but I'm going to stick with this. Because for me at the time, it felt like the perfect recommendation. I was supposed to be teaching, and maybe it was the second half of a U.S. history survey course, and I felt totally inadequate putting together my syllabus. I had never taken such a course myself. And while I knew lots of things, I was fully aware of how much I didn't know. And so reading Courage to Teach was a relief, because Palmer kind of reassured me that I didn't need to know everything in order to be a good teacher. And furthermore, very shocking to me, he suggested that being transparent about my vulnerability might even be a strength. That concept really was kind of mind-blowing because I hadn't seen vulnerability modeled for me in my own college or graduate school professors. They all walked in seeming like beacons of knowledge. And I just knew that that wasn't me. So I did the best I could. I put together what I hoped would be an effective lesson plan, but I also tried to be open about ideas or concepts that confounded me, acknowledge when I couldn't supply specific information, and turn my own uncertainty into an invitation for us all, professors and students together, to learn, sometimes from books, but also from each other. Not quite ready for my slide. The virtue of hospitality is also essential in my approach to teaching. Although there are many academic sources that can verify the importance of nurturing discussion in the context of a safe space, I think many of us also know this intuitively. Sitting in the living room of Doug Frank's cabin up at the Oregon Extension with my fellow students who I lived with, worked with, hiked with, grocery shopped with, cooked with, the conversation about challenging books and difficult ideas became one where Doug really didn't even need to be there because we knew each other and enjoyed talking about books. To recreate such a thing. And I was just telling Marianne, this is almost what happened for me yesterday in my humanities section. Pretty great. So, not surprisingly, I still don't love giving lectures, although I can, and I do. But because my real delight is in conversation, I try to cultivate the kind of hospitality that lends itself to the best conversations. And in this regard, I often think of the example of hospitality in Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. One of my key takeaways from that book back in high school was to think about the importance of understanding things by taking a walk in someone else's shoes, which, as I think about that seemingly fairly simple idea, is a fundamental aspect of hospitality. But then, a couple of years ago, I read the book again in the company of students in an upper-level history course. And this time, one particular incident from the book that had escaped my notice the first time reading it, a good reason to reread books, just putting that out there. They still have something to say the second, maybe the third, maybe even the fourth or fifth time that you read them. Something stood out to me that I hadn't noticed the first time. It involves the story of Walter Cunningham, a poor white country kid who goes to school with the main character, Scout Finch. And I don't know, have people out there read To Kill a Mockingbird? Okay, so I don't have to go into all the details. If you haven't read it, like my husband still hasn't read it, I mean, y'all should go read it. And I think we probably have multiple copies in the library for you to go check out right after I'm done talking, which, just saying. Great Christmas reading, honestly. Read that one maybe as a family, I don't know. Lydia knows that I will be reading that with her. Lydia's my daughter. Anyway, let's see here. Where was I? Okay, so it develops the story of Walter Cunningham, a poor white kid. Goes to school, Scout Finch. All right, so a new teacher, seeing that Walter Cunningham did not bring a lunch to school, offers him a quarter so that he can buy lunch in town. And poor Walter, and poor Scout. Walter refuses the quarter, to the teacher's consternation, because she's honestly trying to do a good thing, give him the quarter, until Scout explains that Walter can't accept it because he can't pay it back. And the teacher, in persisting in her offer, is shaming him. So Scout tells this to the poor teacher. Jem, Scout's older brother, ends up inviting Walter over to their house for lunch, but not until Scout has given Walter a thrashing. But anyway, that's another story. Such an interesting book. Walter accepts the invitation and eats heartily, but to Scout's confusion, asks for molasses. He then proceeds to pour the molasses over everything. And then I'll turn it over to Harper Lee. Harper Lee writes from the perspective of Scout, "He would have poured it into his milk glass had I not asked what the Sam Hill he was doing." Calpurnia then asks Scout to follow her into the kitchen, where Calpurnia strongly reprimands Scout for her bad manners. When Scout protests by saying Walter is just a Cunningham, Calpurnia replies that it doesn't matter who he is because anyone who sets foot in their house is their company, their guest, and ought to be treated as such. So this incident from this book really made me re-examine what it meant to be a good host in the context of the classroom. First, a good host tries to provide really good food. That's pretty straightforward, I think. Have an excellent meal, but make sure you even got a little molasses. But maybe even more importantly, a good host understands where her guest is coming from, what her guest needs, and is willing to put her own expectations aside for a moment in order to meet that guest where he or she is. So while it's important for me to have a plan, to have guidelines, to have some basic expectations and some good content, to have a good meal prepared, it's also been important for me to try to see my students, to understand when an exception might need to be made so that everyone has the opportunity to feel safe, valued, and to relax enough to learn. Finally, the liberal arts. I got a little 3-point sermon here, but this part has point A and B, so you have to stay tuned here for the second part. It's worth mentioning 2 key influences on my thoughts about the importance of the liberal arts. The first, again, was one that Sam Elvard from the Oregon Extension encouraged me to read when I asked him for some reading suggestions. And this was Simone Weil's On the Importance of School Studies. I wish someone had assigned this essay to me back in college. And I kind of wish, I don't think I can make this mandatory, but I kind of wish it was mandatory reading here at Bethel University. Basically, Weil makes the case that every effort expended on intellectual effort is one that has spiritual benefits too. She opens the essay with the statement that the key to a Christian conception of studies is the realization that prayer consists of attention. The quality of the attention counts for much in the quality of the prayer. Warmth of heart cannot make up for it. She then goes on to talk about how school studies help us increase our capacity for attention, and that even if we don't get the right answers or solve the problems, the attention that we have expended in trying to do so is worth these efforts. By the end of the essay, she notes that the development of such attention is also helpful in terms of how we treat our fellow human beings, noting that the capacity to give one's attention to a sufferer is a very rare and difficult thing. It is almost a miracle. It is a miracle. I think her words speak for themselves. The second influence comes from my study and teaching of history. And I'm just going to step away to have a beverage here. I have a sore throat, so I sound a little bit, verklempt, but I'm also just having a sore throat. Anyway, here we go. So Bethel University still asks teaching applicants to respond to a prompt something like, why is it important for you to teach at a Christian liberal arts university? So here's what I wrote in 2004, using the differing views of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois as a way to respond to that question. I'm not sure who I thought I was, but I still think it works. So
it did work.
I mean, you did, right? It did. Okay. So since probably 2 people read the essay back then, I thought it was okay to just crib from myself. So Barrett, sorry, you've maybe read this one. I don't know. So I wrote, at the turn of the 20th century, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois disagreed on the type of education African Americans should pursue. Washington thought African Americans should pursue a vocational education because this education would allow them to pursue the practical goals of economic independence or self-reliance. Du Bois, on the other hand, believed that African Americans should pursue a liberal arts education. Exposure to the arts, literature, philosophy, and the natural sciences was the route to intellectual excellence and leadership. These differing perspectives on education reflected contrasting ideas about the relationship of African Americans to the rest of the world. Washington's ideas about education seemed to support his theory of what critics called racial accommodation, that African Americans should not seek primarily to change the world in which they lived. Instead, they should seek to develop the skills which would allow them to get along as best they could in an imperfect world in which racism circumscribed Black rights and opportunities. Du Bois, on the other hand, did not believe in racial accommodation. He hoped that through exposure to the liberal arts, Black leaders would arise and challenge the existing norms of society to change it for the better. For Christians, questions about the function of education are different, yet there are certain parallels. What are Christians called to do? Some Christians believe they should give this world up for lost and focus exclusively on their individual quest for reunion with God in the afterlife. Others, and Jürgen Moltmann talked about this, we just talked about this yesterday in Humanities. Others, myself included, believe that in the process of making themselves holy before God, Christians are also called to take part in the redemptive work that Christ himself epitomized with his sacrifice on the cross. For this task, the liberal arts education has much to offer by seeking to acquaint students with a broad understanding of the world in which they live. On the one hand, a liberal arts education can deepen students' appreciation for God's creation. When God had finished creating the world, he did pronounce it good. Even though sin has corrupted this world, there is still evidence, I think, of that goodness. This is true not only in the natural world, but I would be so bold to say even in the contributions of humans, who, after all, were created just a little lower than the angels. The study of natural sciences helps students see the intricacies of that creation, just as the study of the arts and humanities allows students to understand the creative abilities God gave to humans. On the other hand, a liberal arts education can also show students the brokenness of creation, alerting them to the redemptive work that must still be done. While we are commanded to think on holy things, we must also be willing to minister to the broken parts of creation. The study of natural sciences also helps students see creation run amok, just as the study of the arts and humanities shows students the darkness in the hearts of humankind. Today, a Christian liberal arts college must retain some of the Washingtonian elements of education, equipping students with practical skills for economic independence so that they can accommodate themselves to the world in which they live. Yet, a Christian liberal arts college must also offer students a deeper, broader understanding of the world in which they live, not only as a way of strengthening their understanding of the Creator, but also as a way of creating Christian leaders to challenge the existing brokenness of society and change it for the better. So that's what I wrote 20 years ago. And so I'll just end with a passage of scripture that has been helpful to me this semester. Some of you know that I follow the Anglican Church's liturgical reading schedule, and literally like 2 weeks before the semester was supposed to begin, this Old Testament passage showed up as sort of like a, hey, just as you're about to get teaching again, here's maybe something to think about. So I'll close with this set of verses, maybe as a kind of benediction. Wisdom has built her house. She has set up her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her maids to call from the highest places in the town. Whoever is simple, let him turn and hear. To him who is without sense, she says, come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Leave simpleness and live and walk in the way of insight. Thank you very much. I think I'm supposed to take questions. So if you have questions, I will attempt to answer them. But if you do not have questions, that's okay too. Oh, April Vending, I saw your hand first.
Oh, okay, but there's a dean up there. Maybe Barrett should ask first.
This is democracy here in the library. Yeah.
Okay, I am a little bit heartbroken listening to this vision because I want this, I believe in this, right, for education. And I feel hopeless about our ability to do it and to continue doing it. What are you holding on to these 20 years later? What do you think is required? And maybe of the individual instructor, but it feels crushing for the one, right?
Yeah.
So of us, how do we do this?
Yeah, well, so first of all, I feel like here's where I see hope. We still require students to take a robust first year set of courses, and at least in terms of our traditional undergraduate students. So I look at my friend Chris here. Like, if you've ever watched Chris or any of the CWC people lecture, even if it's falling on deaf ears, like, they are putting some beautiful things out there. Like, and again, Curdy doing CWC with her small groups. Like, you know, I walk in to the classroom and they don't necessarily even know what they're supposed to be talking about that day. But I know, again, like, at least 50 to 70 minutes later, they will have at least had the exposure. And I think, like, the fact that the university is still willing to invest in programs like CWC and say, no, this is what makes Bethel special, you have to take that. And the fact that they're willing to allow us to still teach humanities, where we're offering our best take on literature, history, art, music, and trying to see how it all, like, that is where I hold on to the hope. And I think, too, I feel like we still offer students some beautiful things here. And I think it doesn't sort of matter what other people tell us. We have to reject this idea that we're a luxury and just fight. So, all right, Barrett.
My question is kind of a smaller scope. It's also a little bit of a selfish question, because I felt much the way you did at the beginning of your career. Like, I like school, but I'm not sure I like teaching.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if teaching feels more natural for you now.
Boy. I feel like I have more practice. So I have my go-tos, you know? And so like there's a way in which like the routine and the fact that I've built up my own sort of liturgy, right, in terms of teaching, like I can step into that even if I'm not feeling it. But like the classroom is just like, you just never know what is gonna happen. And so I just feel like, I mean, every day, as much as I like, okay, sure, now I have taught a US history survey course. I can prepare I can prepare a syllabus for that, feeling pretty confident that I'm doing that all right. Like I still don't know like how the students are going to respond in the first section to the material versus the second section. I mean, I feel like it's an incredibly humbling experience every day coming to campus. So, yes and no. I don't know who is next as far as Dan Ritchie.
Can I just piggyback on
Sure.
Sarah's question? Yeah. Maybe it helps to be retired for a little while and to get a different perspective. But if we set higher education to the side, there has been a huge explosion in classical education K through 12.
Yeah.
Charter schools are dominated by classical academies, including for underserved populations. So I think there is a huge market out there of parents who would like to see their children have a robust general education portion to their university. We have a great opportunity, and most of higher education is blowing it.
Yeah. No, and I mean, we just did a little survey in humanities yesterday, and I love how many students were like, my favorite book from Humanities 1 was the beautiful epic poem, The Odyssey. They loved that poem. And it's like, have you seen the book? It's thick. And they're like, no, we didn't just slog through that. We loved that book. That's one of the books we want to talk about in our podcast that's coming up. So, I mean, if we just can put it out there, I feel like maybe we need to do a better job convincing, others, but like the students are convinced, I think, not just their parents. My daughter's reading The Odyssey. It's great talking to her about that. Good times. Are there other questions? Angela Shannon.
So what has been your biggest challenge, do you think, and how have you dealt with that in the classroom or as a professor?
I think what's really hard for me personally is trying to understand that students are my customers in some ways. Like they're in my care, but like there is no obligation on the part of students to care either about me or the material. That's not their job. My job is to get them to care about the material. And if they care about me, that's great, that's a bonus. But my job is to kind of invite them into, woo them in to education. And sometimes that means I have to get out of the way. And it might mean that I have to sort of deal with stuff that I wish I didn't have to deal with. I have to sometimes deal with students who are like, this is dumb. And I just have to be humble. And that's personally, I'm just gonna admit, that's really hard for me. It's really hard for me to be humble and just be like, nope, okay, don't be defensive. Figure out where are they coming from so that I can respond, not in kind, because that wouldn't be good, but how I can respond, again, in a wooing way. Wooing, that's not my gift, that's somebody else's, but I've tried to nurture that capacity. Maybe that's a terrible answer, but that's my truth, if you will. So, any other questions? Concerns? I usually ask my students, concerns? Do you have concerns? Should I be fired now? Should I not? Should I give back the award?
Okay, I'll just throw it.
Sure, Amy Dykstra.
If you were going to write your essay Again.
This essay? Oh, my essay that I wrote 20 years ago.
What would you change, if anything?
Dude, I wouldn't change a thing. I always tell my students I am a little boring because I am exactly what you expect. I am not trying to trick you. I am like this is just literally, this is what you will get. So, sorry. There it is. Other questions?
If you had someone recommend some readings to you when you
Yeah.
were starting, what would you recommend to someone now?
Well, it's funny. I was looking for my own copy of Courage to Teach, and I've clearly given that to a student because that's no longer on my bookshelf. So definitely that one is great. I mean, people who like techniques and ways of teaching probably are not going to love that book. But for someone like me who just needed to relax a little bit, that was a great book. Also, I think Simone Weil's essay is really good. In terms of other teaching, I feel like read books about being a human being, because that's really that's what everybody needs. And I feel like students especially need that because they're scared, especially those first couple days in the classroom. So if you can read books about what it means to be a human being and to be a good human being. I mean, Gilead, we were just talking about that. What a model. That's one of my favorites. And I think, I think though you also need to work in a little heart of darkness, honestly, because you have to know that people aren't necessarily always very good. And you need to somehow be equipped with that too. I don't know. That work for you? Mm-hmm. Cool. Anything else? Oh, Susie, and then Chris Gertz.
Oh.
Susie, your hand was up first. It's a democracy. It's okay. Chris doesn't mind.
Okay. Well, I would just like to say, as an administrative assistant for arts and humanities, even though there's not that division anymore, it's been my privilege to work with, I see so many familiar faces in this room, to work with people in that area. And I just feel like I was a Bethel student back many years ago. And I remember my dad would ask me, he was like an engineer, and he's like, well, what are you going to do when you graduate? I'm like, Dad, I'm becoming a more well-rounded person. Yeah. And it's so wonderful to see this be reinforced, that in especially times, we always have divisive times, I think, but right now the world is just crazy. And to know that there are people with hearts, and that we see the literature and arts and the things in the humanities that really make a difference, and that students here are getting that foundation. It's not just ticking off a list of facts or things that numbers or science things. Sorry, I'm not a science person, but that foundation you can go out and. My dad would always say, well, what are you going to do? What kind of job are you going to have when you graduate? It's like, people that come here and learn from a liberal arts education can go out into the world and be prepared for anything because they've got this great foundation. They know how to be, like we were saying, human beings.
Yeah.
And I just want to say thank you to everyone in this room, but, especially the arts and humanities faculty and deans. Former arts and humanities faculty dean Eric Fisher was my former boss. And, I'm just grateful to be here, and this presentation, and you, AnneMarie, just Dr. Kooistra, amazing. So thanks.
Well, it gives me no more pleasure than people to tell somebody, just go ask Susie. Just go see Susie. So thank you. All right, Dr. Gertz.
I think that's a better place to end.
That's a better place to end.
I'll talk to you later.
Okay. I don't know if that sounded like a good thing, honestly. It's good. It's good. Okay. All right. Are we good? We're good. Ann Gannon is saying we are good. Thank you very much for coming.